Hi guys, thanks for checking out the video. So this one here is still on the beta test for the UBERRPG project, the RPG Stats add-on. I'm just going to go over some of the code here just to point out some of the equations that we've got and what I'm trying to test for this beta and what you can, basically how the structure works so that if you do want to go in and extend it or edit it, you'll know what to look for. So just going into the code, the three main scripts that you'll want to have a look at editing, I wouldn't really touch the other scripts, but you can if you know what you're doing, are the entity combat, entity stats, and the invector uber RPG script. So you can see if we come up to the top, so all this here is basically setting up all the different parts so it can actually grab the different features and components that it needs to. So we've actually got here, so you can see it sets here if you've got melee or if you've got shooter, and that's especially necessary for when you're using it on AI, if you don't have the FSM AI thing to use the range weapons, stuff like that. So we're just going to try and shrink that. The first one we want to have a little look at is, you can see here it's grabbing the different attack types and then applying the right damage values on that. Don't worry too much about that. I'm just going to try and find where the here we go, calculate damage. So this one here is where the mainstay of it is. So this is the damage system and how it figures it out. So you've got your base damage here, which is actually the weapon based damage. Now that's on the weapon itself. You can type in the amount of damage that it does. That's a standard thing for Invector. And then of course we come down here. So if we're using unarmed or melee, which is basically the same thing, so if you've got a melee weapon like a sword or an axe, it's the same equation for if you're punching. So what that's doing is it's actually taking a stat value, which is using strength and melee, and it's mixing those two together and timesing it by the base damage that you've actually the weapon will do. And then it does a little bit of a function here where it takes that equation that's up there and it gives it a random range based on the amount that you've got there. So there's a little bit of variance when you attack, so you're not just doing the same amount of damage each time. If you do want to do the same amount of damage each time, you can actually just get rid of this random range here, and then yeah, it'll just put through whatever the calculation up the top is there. And then what we've got it doing is it's actually being multiplied by the critical hit multiplier. So we've actually got a critical hit function in there that'll base off your luck, and it will have a random chance to cause a critical strike, which will end up multiplying your damage. And then of course it takes that damage amount out, and then that uses it uses that in another damage method, which I'll talk about later. Here we've got the adjust armor score. So what this does here is actually looks for when you equip and unequip a piece of armor, it will adjust the value accordingly based on that armor. And then we've got the calculate defense. So this is where it actually figures out how much armor you've got, how much defense you've got, so that when you do get attacked, when you're up in this thing here, the damage that comes out in the damage equation, it will reduce that amount based on your defense amount. So you can see here what we do is we run a bit of a random value here, grab between Constitution. I thought I actually changed this, but maybe I didn't. So this one here, so it's grabbing both strength, dexterity, and constitution, and then it's giving a little random range of those numbers and putting that together, and then it's also adding the armor score that you've got. So that becomes your an amount there, which is a defense value, and then that's used again in the damage equation in order to figure out how much damage to reduce. We've got applied damage reduction, which is you can see here that's what it's actually doing, so that when you do get damaged, it will take away the damage and defense and give you a percentage reduction. So that's basically turning that damage defense, that defense value, into a percentage of the actual damage itself in order to remove that amount. So instead of actually negating specific points of damage based on that score there, you are getting a percentage of the damage that is incoming. So you will always actually be damaged unless you've got like a damage value of less than 1, then you'll have some issues with that. So the next one that we want to have a look at is entity stats. This is where the mainstay of the stat system is. So you can see here we've got some serialized fields, and they're based off the RPG stat class, which is one of the classes that we've written. These are your stats effectively. So if you want to add more stats in, or more attributes, this is where you do it. You can pretty much just copy one of these lines and then just change the values. So change the name of luck to, you say you want wisdom, you can type in wisdom and then new RPG stat and then wisdom in there, and that will update automatically on the inspector window when you come into here. So I'll just show a quick example of that. So I'm just going to copy that one. Wisdom. And I'm going to change that there. Now if I save that, we come into our inspector and it fixes itself. Alright, so if we scroll down now and we open it up, you can see now we have wisdom here, and you can adjust that slider. Now that's not actually doing anything at the moment because I don't have any calculations for it to work with, the same as I don't have any calculations for the tech thing, but this is just showing that you can add new stats if you want to have more, increase the different stats, and yeah, do it that way. And then of course the same thing with the attributes, you can do it the exact same way. And now of course we've got other things. So we've got the experience points, we've got the armor score, and then you've got a linear growth here. So this is for the leveling system. So the amount of XP that you need to level. If you got here, you can see that we've just got a basic one here. So at each level, it adds an extra 1,000 points that you need to increase it by, which is just a linear growth model. You can change that to whatever equation you want, like in case you want it to be like a percentage amount or whatever. You could just, this is where you would go to replace that equation in order to change the leveling system. So we don't have to worry too much about the set list of stats, set list of attributes, because that's just basically filling it out into what we need it to. I'm just going to save that because I've got the thing. So the get level, again, these are just basic things. So it's just getting the values that we need in order to fill it out, which is fine. Stat value, yep, here. So if we go back to our combat, if you see here, we had this little part. So base damage times this stat value. This was actually an equation in the entity stats one. So I'll go back to that now. You can see here stat value. So this is what it's basically doing. It's getting that value. So it's taking the stat that you've passed in, and in the melee version we were talking about strength being the stat. It takes that number and it adds it to the attribute skill, which was melee. It divides them both by half and adds them together, and then it times them or multiplies them by a specific value, and then the other value is 2 or something like that, and that's basically a float power exponential that it handles it. Then when it comes back in here, it takes that and then it gives it a little bit of random variance between the number that was in there, adds it to the critical hit multiplier, and then of course you get that damage put out as a float amount. So this would be if you want to sort of increase or decrease the amount of damage that you're doing per hit. This would be where you would go to in order to figure that out, and how to put it together. So be very careful when you play with these because you can pretty much get damage amounts in the thousands each hit, and sometimes it'll get so high that you won't even be able to it won't even come up as saying it's done damage amount, but the character will die. So you don't want to play with this too much because this is just the base equation that I've got at the moment. It's very difficult because it is like the lower the value, the very minimal damage you're going to do, but I'm trying to balance it out between the health and the damage that you get via the stats that you have. So have a play with it, and if you do want to change it, try fiddling around with it, but always make sure that you've got a copy of the original there so that you don't break it and then have to reload everything. And you can see here we've got our critical hit multiplier, so we've got the random value, and if that value is under the amount under 2 or equal to the luck value that you've got, you'll return a 2, which basically says that yes, you have a critical hit multiplier of times 2, so you'll double your damage. So the higher your luck value, the more likely you are to return the correct value. Random value, yeah, between 0 and 1. So yeah, that should work out. That might not actually work out too well. I'll have to double check that one anyway. But hopefully you will see it pop up every now and then. You will get a critical hit on there depending on your luck value. So just have it high up and test it out. If it's not really working, then get back to me and I'll have to go over that value thing again. It was working the last time I used it, but I might not. We've made some changes, so it might not work. Then of course we got the level up ability here. So when you saw when I leveled up before, we actually got 3 points to our stats and 5 points to the attributes. At the moment, stats and attributes are actually doing the same amount of buff. So I would actually suggest turning that one to 5. The reason I had that adjusted to the different points is that the stats were actually going to be a different type of number. A lower number, so that it would affect it more greatly, so that the more points you have, you're going to maximize it and whatever. But yeah, this is where you would adjust how many points you're actually allocated to level up in your character sheet on each level that you get. And if you wanted it so that every second level or every third level, you would just uncomment this section here, and that would be every second level you would get more stat points. But at the moment, because they're equal, I've just got it so that you're getting an equal amount both times. Every time you level up. Now this is where we get into setting the different values. So you can see here for health, what it's doing is it's taking the constitution value and the hardiness skill, and it's doing that same thing that we had above with the other stats, and it's taking those values, multiplying them by a little bit of a different number this time, and feeding that into your health controller. So the actual vector controller gets updated with the maximum amount of health. This would be where you would go to if, this here is actually just to protect it from being less than 1, because your character will die upon spawn if it's less than 1. So that's why I always say put 30 into constitution and 30 into the hardiness skill, so that you've got at least a little bit of health. Yeah, why it's, you could edit this here so that it would actually update not only the max health but the current health or whatever to the max health value. You could add that in here if you want them to, when they level up, gain all their health back. I just have it off so that it doesn't play around with certain things. Now the same thing goes for the stamina, except here we've actually got a base value of 100, so you'll always have at least 100 stamina, and then it will go up there as part of a growth pattern here to the power, but it's using dexterity and the acrobatic skills. And it's effectively the same equation, just with the extra 100 on it, and then that sets your max stamina to the next value. And of course stamina grows back by itself, so you don't need to add in anything there to fill the stamina up. Now we come down here, we've actually got movement speed. So I've actually played with the movement speed on the character, which is why you need to have root motion selected when you're using it, because you can see here we've got a value of 1 for each of these. All right, so if you don't want to use root motion and you do want to go with the regular character controller without using root motion, you can actually change the values here to the base values that you get when you start, or whatever values you feel specific to what you need. But the issue that you might end up having is that the new speed value might not be enough to actually create too much of a change. This is based off the amount that I've got here. So this is the equation up here that actually handles it. It's dexterity and the acrobatic skill. Those two together will increase your movement speed, so that the higher they are, the faster you will move. And I've got it so it caps off at about something like 1.5 or 1.6 or something like that. So it's a noticeable difference from when you're actually on 1, but it's not a noticeable distance as you gradually get higher. But it does end up making you a lot faster. And now I've also got it so you can jump a little bit higher than normal. And I might make that so the air speed actually gets longer, so you can actually jump further forward as well if you're using root motion. But otherwise, yeah, you can adjust these values to what you need if you don't want to use root motion. But I was just using root motion, so it was always 1 plus whatever the amount there to multiply it with. But you don't want it to go too crazy, especially with root motion, because you'll end up moving faster than your legs are actually moving, and it won't look right. So yeah, so that's the different methods that it uses to alter the stats. Now we'll come over to this script here, and this is where we have, don't need to worry too much about that, so that's just where it's setting those values, that's fine. So here's the take damage function. So this is what hooks into the invector system and passes the damage amounts through. So you can see we're using the invector damage call there. So if we've got it equal to 0, it will just return out. If the health controller is null, it will return that. So what it's doing is it's basically going, okay, well, we need to take damage, so it's finding the health controller, it's going to change that amount by the damage value. And then it's going to here reduce damage based on defenses and reapply to health. So the damage reduction will come through there. It's going to calculate the defense, it's going to apply the damage reduction via the two damage reduction call. So it's going to get the value, then it's going to pass through the reduction value, and then it's going to find the health controller, and then it's going to change the health amount via the new amount of damage that's come back from that apply damage reduction call there. And then, of course, it's going to give us our little debug. So this is when we see the stuff coming up in the console. So it'll come up here, it'll get the character name of who's been damaged, and it will then put in how much damage it's come out. And then it's going to tell you how much damage reduction has actually come out in a percentage amount. And that is pretty much it. Oh, the other function there is the award experience, and it passes through an amount. So the button is the button on the page that adds 500 XP is effectively doing this function here, and it's just passing through 500 as the int, and then it's going to go to the increase XP by amount, and that'll add onto our character. So this is the function here that we're going to be using when we're using a dialogue tool or stuff like that, or if you want a quest reward of experience, or if we're killing an enemy, you'll gain experience from that. So all it is like on death, just call this function and pass through an amount that you want for each of them. But I'll show you that when we're actually setting up the rest of the system when we get to that stage. But for now, this is pretty much the 3 scripts that you need to have a go at and modify if you want to modify any different values. This one here, I wouldn't really modify anything in here because this is all set up pretty much as how it's supposed to be. But yeah, the entity stats and entity combat are the ones that contain the different equations. So they're the primary ones, and if you want to see drastic changes, or if you want to change it to tailor it towards what you're after for your game, this would be where you get through and change it. And just be mindful as well is that if you do go to our stats here and you change the names of these, in entity combat here, when you've actually got these things, you'll need to change the names of these as well to match those particular stats that you've just put in. Or that if you modify the name, then you'll need to modify the name here so that it's calling the right stat. Otherwise, you'll get an error and it won't work. Anyway, thank you for watching. Hopefully that lets you get an idea about how it works and how to go from here. Thank you very much.